this was the idea of our J10 committee, the graduates of the last 10 years, but of course we're opening this up to everybody. We wanted to have this conversation to talk about how journalists are dealing with this coronavirus, especially as many people have to stay at home and all. And for this first episode, we're going to be talking with Vladimir Duthiers, who's a graduate from the class of 2011. Vladimir is a CBS News and CBS This Morning correspondent and an anchor. And for those of you who don't know, before he went to journalism school, he worked in finance. And then he came here and he worked at CNN. He worked in Lagos, Nigeria. Since he's been at CBS 2, he's covered a lot of big news, like at Ferguson, the elections. He's a Peabody Award and Emmy Award winning journalist. And he's been at CBS News since 2014. And he's going to be interviewed by Pavni Mittal, who's class of 16. She got her MA in politics at the J School, and she's co-chair of the J10 committee. She's based in New York City, where she's a freelance reporter and producer for PBS NewsHour, Weekend, CNN International, and NBC News. And we're so lucky to have both of them here to talk about what's been going on. So thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you, Maria, and thank you, Vlad. Thanks for joining me. I know you've had a long day. I know you do mornings. So Maria just spoke about where all you've reported from. Nigeria, I know you were in Haiti. So which exotic location are you joining me from today?
The exotic location of what we've started to affectionately call the CBS News Upper West Side Bureau, which is essentially my apartment, and it has been for the last it will be a month this Wednesday that we have been broadcasting here for CBS This Morning, and just recently for CBSN from this location.
Ready? Welcome to the CBS News Upper West Side Bureau, otherwise known as my apartment. My name is Vladimir Duthiers. I'm a CBS News correspondent, CBSN anchor, and this is how we are bringing you the news every single day on CBS This Morning on CBS News. This is where we produce our What to Watch segment for CTM. You can see here I'm supported by my producer Suvro, who's rolling out the graphics and all the video that you see on the show. We're using 2 television screens to do that. I had to bring one out from the guest room. On sound, we've got Daniel producing the sound quality for us, and shooting this is our photojournalist Derek, who's holding the camera right now. Obviously, we're all keeping a healthy 6 feet apart, but this is what it takes to produce the news in the age of coronavirus. I don't have a teleprompter, guys. When I stand here, I'm using this tablet to bring you the notes that I have here on my tablet that provide the news. We thank you so much for sticking with us. We hope that we're informing you. We hope that we're shedding light. Stay safe, be healthy, look out for your loved ones. We'll see you soon.
Point before while you're doing your hits and stuff, you have at least 2 more people with you in your apartment. That's right.
Yeah, so when the broadcast center was closed, because we initially had a couple of people from the news organization who tested positive for COVID-19, the crew that I had with me is the crew that you just saw in that video. And so subsequent to that, they've been with me every single day since that first day back in early March when the broadcast center closed. In other words, they were assigned to me from that day on, and they've only been assigned to me. So their interactions with the outside world are limited to them coming here and then going back home to their families. They haven't done any other shoots. They haven't been anywhere else. Obviously, we all occasionally have to run to the supermarket or the pharmacy, but they're under strict, they've been told to essentially only expose themselves on a very an emergency basis if they need to. So that's the crew that I've had, and they've been with me this entire time. When we're here in the apartment, you can see that we are 6 feet apart, and now we're all wearing masks. In the last couple of days, we've actually started wearing masks here, and that is how we've been able to do it for CBS This Morning. But a lot of our other anchors and correspondents are using live views with their phones or with cameras that are set up for them. And in some cases, now robotic cameras are being installed in the homes of some anchors. And so the goal, obviously, is to limit the footprint. It's to limit the amount of people that the CBS News organization is coming into contact with.
But when people come into your apartment and they leave, I mean, do you go on a sanitizing spree afterwards? Like, I just want to get a sense of how you do it, because it's a lot more work. I feel like when I come back from the grocery store, I'm like going crazy for an hour just wiping everything.
Yeah, no, it's the reality of the world that we live in. In fact, that was the first piece that we produced for CBS This Morning, which was things you should be thinking about when you are disinfecting your home. So yeah, when the crew leaves, I disinfect. They generally are in the same exact locations pretty much the entire time that they're here. They're on that island that you probably saw in that video. That's where they set up the camera. That's where they set up the sound. And other than occasional runs to the bathroom, they're not moving around the apartment all that much. They're wearing masks. They have gloves on. And so when they leave, I disinfect that area. I disinfect the doorknobs. I disinfect the remotes. They use remote controls to use the video that we produce for the program into my television screen. So I disinfect those. I disinfect the doorknobs. I disinfect the faucets and the bathrooms. And so there's a little bit of extra work when the crew is clear, but it's obviously necessary and it's important to do. And so it doesn't bother me. I'm a germaphobe to begin with, so I probably do that anyway if you just visited my house in a period when we weren't in the midst of a pandemic.
So you've been training for this all your life?
Oh yeah, this is not, I actually, believe it or not, I was not one of those people who had to scramble for Clorox wipes or disinfectants because I already have it.
But what's your workflow like? Because I know that, you do the morning show. So I don't know, what time do you wake up? And just can you take us through your day-to-day?
Yeah, so the morning begins for me. The crew shows up at around 6 a.m. And I'm up obviously about a half hour or so, 45 minutes before that, preparing the apartment. They keep some of their gear here, so I bring that out and help set that up. And from about 6 o'clock, the CBS This Morning producers have already been in up and awake and producing the show for many, many hours. And my producer, specifically who works with me, her name is Danielle Yerkew. She is the one who puts together the elements that I use for my segment every morning on CBS This Morning. And so when I finally settle in and the crew gets here, she and I have a conference call to go over the stories, to go over the editorial. Generally, the day before, starting at around 5 or 6 p.m., I'm finding interesting stories and sharing them with a dayside producer who at the end of the night at about 8 or 9 p.m. will send out a list of stories that she finds interesting for the What to Watch segment. And I will then be in contact with the overnight producer, Danielle, and another senior producer, Chris Stover, to tell them what stories I like, what stories I don't like. If there's an instance, like for example, today we're going to be talking to somebody whose daughter is holding daily reading sessions on Facebook Live for anybody who wants to listen to a fourth grader read a book if they're bored at home in the midst of the pandemic. So I'm going to be talking to her mom. We'll do that as a Skype. That'll be fed to New York before I go to sleep. They'll have it. They'll work on editing that and to work it into the piece into the segment tomorrow morning. At 6:30, Danielle and I will have an editorial call. Suvro Banerjee, my producer, will have arrived by then. He and I will get on the call and talk to Danielle about the different elements, the different editorial things that she needs me to keep in mind. We'll go through the rundown of how the interaction is going to work with the anchors, because our anchors now, Gail, Tony, and Anthony, are also now reporting and anchoring from home. So there's a little bit of a delicate ballet because there's a delay in the way that we can interact with each other as opposed to being on set when we're all sort of like interacting in real time. With the delay and the fact that we're remote, there's a little bit of a lag. And so there is a little bit of choreography that goes into how I toss back to them and how they toss to me to move on to the next story. So we'll go through that. And then at about 7 a.m. rather, the show CBS This Morning starts airing. And we start our rehearsals where I rehearse from the standing position and I go through the stories, and Suvro will run through the list of elements that will roll out in a monitor that I have actually on my dining table here. And we do that a couple of times until we're feeling confident. And then we wait for the show. Usually, my segment airs at 7:48 every morning. And so we go live at 7:48. By 8 o'clock, we're done. And then we start breaking down and preparing for CBSN. And generally that happens at about 10 a.m. where we go live on CBSN. During that time, once the crew has set up it's a different shot, a different look for CBSN because now I'm anchoring as opposed to reporting. They generally leave. They leave the apartment and they either go for a coffee run or a coffee break, and then they come back at about 9:30 to get ready for that. We have a larger editorial call because now it's an entire hour of editorial that I'm looking over, and I'm interacting with the producers who are all working from home. And what's really interesting about CBSN is broadcasting live completely remotely. You know, even at CBS this morning, there is a very, very small crew of 2 or 3 people that are in an actual physical control room. CBSN is completely digital. The directors, the editors, the producers are all working from home. So the directors are actually cueing me and directing the show and rolling out elements and rolling out sound bites and going to live events like Governor Cuomo's press conference, all remotely from home. It's a really remarkable thing that I think is going to sort of revolutionize the way broadcast journalism is thought about in the future. So it's a completely digital operation that is pretty impressive. And I don't know all the mechanics, but I'm wowed by what they're able to do to put on an hour or 2-hour broadcast from their bedrooms and living rooms, essentially.
So, but how many people are there in the office? Because like you have a control room there. I'm sure there's someone in the office. Do you have a sense of how many people have to go in and what roles?
For CBSN, no one's in an office. For CTM, I don't know all the details. I'm not high enough on the food chain to know all of the details, but it's a very, very small footprint of people that are working right now at the Ed Sullivan Theater. You know, it's I don't know the number, but it's very, very small. I would say it's less than 5. You know, if I recall. And as far as the anchors and myself, like I said, Anthony Mason is using a live view, so he has no one in his home.
Wow.
Gail has a small footprint like I do. Tony has a small footprint. Dana Jacobson, the anchor of CBS This Morning Saturday, had a robotic camera installed in her apartment, so she didn't have anybody in her apartment. Michelle Miller was on a live view, and I think Jeff Fleur was the only one that was in the studio. So the goal, originally the idea, of course, was that there were some people who tested positive for COVID-19. But since then, this has been something that CBS Viacom has implemented across the company. Viacom and CBS have said, you know, we should diminish the number of people that are working in one place, interacting with each other. That's the only way that we're going to flatten the curve. And so it's not about people that have tested positive. It is about limiting the interaction that our employees around the world, no matter where they are, Viacom, CBS, limiting the interaction they have with other individuals.
So we've already discussed how being a germaphobe all your life has helped. You've also reported from, you know, conflict zones, Boko Haram, I know, you know, Haiti earthquake. How did that kind of, you know, exposure and training and experience help you prepare for, you know, you're living in a conflict zone, essentially, a kind of conflict? What's the commonality with those assignments, and what's the big difference?
You know, that's it's so interesting you asked that question, Pavni. And I note that my friend and former colleague, Evie Jean-Francois, is on this Zoom. At least I saw her on the Zoom, checked in, who's also a graduate of Columbia University School of Journalism. She and I were in Haiti together during the
I saw her wave, I think.
Yeah, okay. Hi, Evie. There she is. Hi, my dear. She and I were in Haiti during the 2010 earthquake, and the Navy ship Comfort was sent to Haiti to help in the humanitarian relief effort there. And ultimately, the crew of that ship saved hundreds of lives over the course of that humanitarian mission. And it was such a source of, I think, inspiration for those of us who are Americans to see the US response by sending this naval ship, Comfort, to help Haitians. I remember Dr. Sanjay Gupta going aboard the ship and actually operating on people who had been hurt by in the wake of the earthquake. And it was really, I think I had a moment of there was sort of a gut punch when I saw that image of the comfort in New York Harbor, and I think a Reuters reporter or an AP reporter snapped a picture of the comfort and in the background you could see the Statue of Liberty. The idea that a ship like that had been sent on humanitarian missions to countries that do not have the resources that this country has, I think drove home what it is that we as a country and we as a planet are facing with this pandemic. And so, yes, on one hand, having reported from some of those locations, having lived in a country in Nigeria where, there were precautions that had to be taken every single day. For example, I could not drink the water in Nigeria. There was always a level of disinfecting whenever you went out of your home and interacted in places that were not necessarily that were less than clean. I reported from very, very poor villages and very poor water villages where, you could imagine that there was probably a lot of bacteria and a lot of things that you could pick up. So disinfecting and always, in the field and living abroad, for example, in Nigeria or when I was in Haiti, I always had disinfectants and alcohol wipes with me, and I use them liberally all the time. I disinfected my home in Nigeria quite often if I had anybody in the home, just because you wanted to be safe rather than sorry. And ironically, also the medication that has been touted by the President of the United States, which has not yet been proven effective, hydroxychloroquine, was something that I still have a lot of that medicine because it was prescribed to me when I moved to Nigeria as an anti-malaria drug. And so it's just ironic that medication has popped up in the news now. So all these things that I sort of had experienced as a reporter working from certain conflict zones, I covered the early stages of the Ebola crisis in West Africa, from West Africa. And what was different about Ebola, and people have asked me about this, is Ebola is a much more deadly disease, right? But it's not easily transmitted in the way that that the coronavirus is. And so whilst it would have been very, very scary to become infected with Ebola because, it does kill people that come into contact with it. It's not easy. You can't just catch it from somebody being in close proximity with somebody, or from the air, the droplets that may be emitted when they breathe or when they cough. So yeah, it's a different level of risk that you're experiencing right here in the United States, where, anytime you walk outside of your door, if you have to leave the apartment for medication or for groceries, you are essentially worried about anybody that you see on the street. Your mind you start to think to yourself, how am I going to distance myself from this person? You find yourself going out of your way, in some cases, into the street to, maintain that healthy distance apart, which is something that I never thought that I would experience here in the United States, having experienced it in places like in Haiti, like in West Africa.
No, but you're indoors, and the thing with journalists is we love being on field, we love being on location, and that gives you a certain advantage in terms of, reporting. So how do you stay on the news? How do you and your organization, CBS, stay on the news and make sure you're getting all the facts and, finding stories?
It's a great question. We do have some reporters, a very, very small number of reporters who, for example, this morning on CBS This Morning, David Begnaud, our lead national correspondent on CBS This Morning, reported from inside a hospital here in New York City. So there are some reporters who are going into those areas and telling the stories that need to be told. But I think one of the things I learned at Columbia was that journalism is constantly evolving. And, the idea of being there is certainly important, but on the flip side, you don't want to, put yourself in an unnatural state of risk that if you don't need to. You can do a Skype interview with a doctor who is in a hospital, and just because I'm not there, but because of the technology that exists, we can do this, for example, Zoom interview with a doctor, and pretty much everything that I would ask and everything that I would get from being in physical contact with that medical professional, I can get through the use of technology now. And so I don't believe that the level of journalism, it's not just CBS News. I don't think for anybody the level of journalism is diminished. In fact, I would say that as the risks have increased, journalists and journalism has found a way to take advantage of technology in a way that we probably did not think that we would have to. And in my mind, it always goes back to, I am constantly reminded of the evolution specifically of broadcast journalism and specifically at CBS News. When I think back to Edward R. Murrow, a young producer who did not have an on-air, meaning a radio background, reporting on air, being sent to Europe in the late 1930s. The goal from the bosses in New York was to basically be a producer and produce, classical music concerts and to produce and to sell. He was sort of a marketing guy for CBS News and became aware of the winds of war that were blowing across Europe and decided to use this technology, this fairly new technology called radio, to send back reports to New York and to America about what he was seeing and what he was witnessing on the ground. And then you fast forward to the age of television, where I'm sure, I've always joked that I'm sure that there were, after the advent of radio reporting and journalism, that there were probably a lot of radio reporters who in the early days of television said, I'm a radio reporter. That's the way we do the news. Television is for idiots. And, who needs a TV to tell the news? And yet eventually came around to this notion of using this new technology, at the time television, to tell the news. And every 10 or 15 years subsequent to that, we've seen an evolution in the use of technology in bringing real news, original reporting to the people who are starved for that information. And so I see it very much in the same way in the midst of this pandemic. Yes, we're not able to get the same datelines as perhaps we might have been in the past. And I know for certain that there are a lot of reporters like myself who love being on the front lines and in the mix. And that's part of why we got into this business, who miss that, but who also are able to take advantage of the technology at our fingertips. And through the use of that technology, I don't think that you've seen, there hasn't been anything that's changed in how we at CBS News and other news organizations are delivering the news to people. And the numbers bear that out. More and more people are tuning in to the CBS Evening News, to CBS This Morning, to CBSN, to CBS News Radio to get their information from us, because they know that the information is accurate, it's fair, it's original, and there hasn't been a lack of that original reporting because of the restrictions or because of the inability to get in some of those places that we normally would do.
And is there a story that has stayed with you? You've been working from home for a month. This has been going on for a while. Is there something that really stayed with you? It could be a really sad story or something, glimmer of hope.
I think for a lot of the reporters who are on this call and who have many more years experience than me, they will probably know this better than I. At this point, the news is fast breaking, and every day there are new developments, and every day there are new numbers to report, and every day you are chasing down information, sometimes inaccurate when it comes from the White House, or sometimes it's misinformation that it has to be sort of chased down and fact checked. I don't know yet that all of the stories that you're talking about, Pavni, have come to light yet. We're starting to see some, right? For example, the reporting that I think First ProPublica did, that now other news organizations are expanding on, that African Americans are going to be disproportionately affected by coronavirus. That is a story that is yet to be written. The fact that, for example, the numbers of people that are infected and that are dying are probably artificially low. There are some people who have criticized the media for inflating the numbers of people infected and people who have died. But in fact, as the New York Times and others have reported, it may be that the numbers are actually artificially low. And we won't know. We won't have a full accounting of the people who have perished due to this terrible pandemic for many months, if not years later. So the stories that stay with me now are stories like that, where we're just learning for example, what is happening in Chicago, which has 30% population of African Americans, but 70% of the people being affected by COVID-19 are African American, or the medical professionals. I shudder to think, when we do a full reckoning and a full understanding and a full reporting of, in the wake of this pandemic, what this will have done to our medical professionals, to the doctors and the nurses, and not just the people who have medical training, the people who support them, the custodians and the folks who are working in these hospitals, how they've been affected, the people who work in restaurants and who drive Ubers and who drive taxis and who drive Lyft cars, how they're going to be affected. I don't know that we know that there will be an effect. We just don't have the data yet. And I suspect that in the next couple of months, in the next couple of years, the reporting that all of us are doing is going to expand on that. And it'll be something like 9/11. It'll be something like the Haiti earthquake, where the full reckoning and the full accounting of this terrible time is yet to be written. That story is yet to be written. So that I think about that a lot, and I think about the people who are affected by this, whose stories we haven't even yet told. We've told a lot of stories, and we've tried to share some lighthearted moments of people who are figuring out ways to date through Zoom and to meet their friends on Zoom and to do events like this on Zoom, and cookies that are baked for medical professionals and children who play violins for their older neighbors from a distance. Those are wonderful stories to share, but I do think that there will be more, and I think that that when those stories are written and when those stories are reported, we're going to find that a lot of people will have a lot of broken hearts.
How big of an issue is fake news? Not just the misinformation and, just the barrage of information coming from the White House, but also, like WhatsApp University. It's like teaching us really bizarre things of how to fight COVID and, what could be a problem, masks, all those things.
It's an issue. I think, when, my own mother will email me something that, is completely wackadoodle that I've never heard of, that I don't know where she got. And it's usually got like 10 different FWs, for forward. So it's like forward. Vlad, you need to read this, right? And then I'll look on it, and it'll be some story that I have to then call her and tell her is not true. And generally, and 99% of the time, the source of that information is an organization or some link or some website that I've never heard of. I think that the reason, Pavni, you've seen people, the numbers for all of the networks, CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, MSNBC, they've gone up is because, it's not fun and games anymore. This is life or death, and people want accurate information and they want real information. And so they go to trusted news organizations like CBS News to get that information. And, occasionally there are mistakes made by reputable news organizations. And the difference between that and one that is not reputable is that those news organizations own up to their mistake. They make a correction, like we were taught at Columbia. You make a correction, and you're up front, and you hold yourself accountable. The news organization is held accountable because there are editors, there are lawyers and people that are looking over everything that we do, everything that we say, everything that we write, everything that we report. And if a mistake is made, then it's corrected. That is the difference between an organization that is reputable and fair and accurate and has a history of being fair and accurate, and one that just popped up out of nowhere. I'm always reminded of being in my ethics class at Columbia, where Dick Wald, who I loved, it was one of my favorite classes at Columbia. He used to always ask the question. I don't know if you did it. I don't know if you've taken a class with him, Pavni, but
no, I did the MA program, so we're completely different.
Oh yeah, the MA, right? You were the MA program, right? So, so this ethics class, I'll never forget. And I was new to journalism, as Maria pointed out. I came to journalism late in the game. I was a career changer. And so everything that I learned at Columbia has served me, has been a sort of a guidepost for me in my career, because I didn't have anything prior to that as far as journalism was concerned. And I'll never forget that one day we did a discussion about what is a journalist? And this was at the time, this was 10 years ago, 11 years ago, when blogging was sort of a big deal, and the citizen journalist was kind of a thing that was sort of taking flight again in the wake of technology. And he said a journalist is one who has an editor. In other words, somebody looking over your shoulder. And it was a very simple explanation, but I've sort of used that when I talk to young journalists myself about what is a journalist and who is a journalist and who is not. Is a journalist in an organization that does journalism is one that has somebody looking over their shoulder. Rights and clearances, lawyers, an ombudsman, whatever it is, editors, producers, so that when I write something, somebody looks at it, and then another person looks at it, and then another person looks at it, and then still another person looks at it, and they have questions for me of my reporting, and that's what we do. That's what we've always done, and that's why people are watching us more than ever.
It's one thing to report a story and to go out and fact check and have editors look over you, but it's another thing that I know you've experienced, which is actually experience the effect of the disease, because I know you lost a dear colleague and talent executive, Maria, at CBS. Could you tell us a little bit about her and your relationship and how CBS is healing through that?
Well, I'll just speak for myself. Maria was a colleague and one that I was especially fond of, and she and I had a wonderful relationship. I put a Facebook message and a message on my social media about our relationship and how she was not only a mentor to me but also the young journalists. She was somebody who I could always count on. If I had anything that I wanted to talk to her about, she was always there for me. It was absolutely heartbreaking to know that somebody who had so valiantly, courageously fought and beaten cancer multiple times was a survivor, lost her fight to this terrible disease. And our entire news organization is still in mourning. And it was a blow. It was a loss to us that I don't think, again, we're not able to measure it because we've not been able to see each other. I haven't, other than the guys that are here every day with me, I have not interacted physically with anybody from CBS in almost a month now. And so we haven't even been able to come collectively to grieve together for Maria. We've all had to do it independently and on our own. So it's certainly, and that is the fact that people in our business, in our field, have been affected, are affected, will be affected, and some sadly have died from COVID-19 it's just indicative of how terrible this pandemic is and how it really doesn't there's no rhyme or reason to it. It's not about it was devastating. It was devastating for us.
How do you think this pandemic and reporting on the pandemic will change the industry when everybody's back in the newsroom? Because there will be a day, we don't know when that will be, but there will be a day.
That's a good question. Again, it's one of those questions that I haven't had a lot of time to think about because the news is so fast breaking every single day. And just keeping up with it and keeping up with all the new developments is a challenge. So it will be interesting to see. I mean, from a technology standpoint, as I said, it is remarkable to see how news organizations are able to still do what we do in the wake of this pandemic. And I suspect that there will be a lot of discussions in newsrooms across the country about that. I guess one of the immediate ways that this is being felt is the economic burden that is being shared across this country by everybody, including journalists and news organizations. I really worry that that some organizations, some newspapers, some media companies will not be able to survive this because of the economic impact at a time when news and information is critically needed, and it's not for the large organizations that I worry so much about, although they are affected as well. But it's certainly the smaller news organizations in communities across this country that don't have, big newspapers that report what is happening in their communities, in their neighborhoods, in their schools, in their police departments. I suspect that already is being felt by a lot of news organizations, and I really, really worry about that impact, the economic impact for news in the future.
You have teams around the world. You have, I know your team in Asia had been covering the pandemic since it broke out in Wuhan, Italy. How do you report the story from places where you don't have bureaus? I mean, you have parts of the world where it is going to be more challenging. The pandemic will have a completely different sort of outlay there. So how is CBS sort of news gathering from around the world?
So far we've been pretty fortunate to have reporters and correspondents and crews in all of those places that you mentioned. That's a sort of a testament to the footprint that CBS News has, and to the correspondents and the producers that we have there. Even if we don't necessarily have on-air reporters in some of those locations, we actually do have producers that are based in many of those locations. And Remy Inocencio, our correspondent in Asia, was in China from the very beginning, reporting the story out. Our Seth Doan was in Italy. Charlie D'Agata, who's normally based in London, was also in Italy. So we've been able to be fortunate enough to have enough of a footprint that we've been able to tell those stories from those hotspots. And so, I think that's a testament to the leadership of our president, Susan Zirinsky, who throughout the entirety of this pandemic has kept us apprised of all the developments that we need to know as a news organization. So I said that, we as a news organization have not been collectively together in quite some time, but we were all connected through the leadership of Susan Zirinsky, who we affectionately call at CBS News Z. And Z has been, just an exceptional. Her leadership has proven to be exceptional. Every day we get an update from her, both written and through our editorial calls, as to what we are doing, what we're thinking about, all the directives with regards to how we report the news. In other words, the distances that we keep when we're with the crews, the masks, the remote technology that we're using, that all comes from Z. And she's been just a champion of all these things. And has kept us apprised of what Viacom CBS is doing across the company as well. So we have not been together in person, but I do feel, when a reporter has a piece like David Begnaud this morning, I text David right away, and I text him and I say that was a great piece of reporting, and we'll text back and forth. Jerika Duncan did a story today on African Americans being disproportionately affected by COVID-19, and she and I will text. Last week we had a friend of ours who's a producer at CBS This Morning, who's also a very close friend, and we had a big birthday Zoom party for her with all of our colleagues from CTN. There must have been 30 people on the Zoom. So not physically together, but using technology to stay in touch with them so that we know how they're doing. And so I like I said, I think that there are challenges, but we've been able to meet those challenges, and we've been able to do it with the level of professionalism and the level of high quality journalism that has been the hallmark of CBS News for almost 80 years. And I'm incredibly proud to work at a news organization like CBS, where we're able to continue to do what we do best, even in the wake of these what sometimes seem like insurmountable challenges.
Great. So some audience questions. What would you advise today's J school students who are not allowed to go out in the field to report about how much they can learn, even though they have to report only from home?
Yeah, I mean, look, that question has come up. So it's not just around coronavirus that.
Holy shit. Okay.
Somebody.
Someone's coughing. Guys, please stay safe.
Stay safe. Yes.
Get yourself tested.
That question has come up often to me, where, for example, I had people, young J schoolers and young reporters who asked me how to best cover Boko Haram if they were freelancers, and they wanted to know how they could, get into Nigeria and get up to northeastern Nigeria to cover the Boko Haram terrorism group. I've had people ask me if they should, go to Syria because they're interested in reporting from the front lines of Syria, but they don't work for large news organizations. They're freelancers, and how can they do that? And I think that what you're seeing here with this pandemic is much in the same way that I answered those young reporters then, which is that you must become adept at using technology to tell the story. I am, I've always said that there are two things that have always stayed with me. One is that if you decide that you want to be a journalist, that you want to be a reporter, you have to come to the understanding that that whatever it is, whatever beat you have, I don't care what the beat is. I don't care if it's politics. I don't care if it's entertainment. I don't care if it's, education. This profession has a certain level of risk that is not inherent in other professions. It's just not. It's not inherent in banking. It's not inherent in, in owning a restaurant, or, your life in many instances will be at risk. And you have to understand that before you decide to apply to the J school, or before you decide that you want to be a reporter. That being said, and so that's why I take it, to me, it's important that people understand that this job, that's why I'm so passionate about this and about sharing my experiences with young reporters, because I want them to take this seriously. Even if they want to cover the Met Gala ball from the red carpet, I want them to understand that there is a level of risk in being a reporter, no matter what it is that you do, that you have to be willing to be okay with. That being said, I don't think reporters should put themselves in in a situation where they are taking an unnecessary level of risk if they don't have to. In other words, if you are a young freelancer and you don't have the backing of a large news organization, and you don't have the training or the security procedures or protocol in place to be in a war zone, you have to seriously think about that before you decide to make that decision. It's the same thing with this coronavirus. I've spoken to I've talked to doctors. They're not even sure that reporters should even be going in some cases to some hospitals. And so, you want to be sure that if you're going to do that, that you understand the risks inherent and that you are prepared for that you have the right appropriate training, and that you have the right gear and material to be able to go and tell that story. If you don't have that, doing it the way that we're doing this Zoom meeting is an ideal way. I was, in the early days of this, I was a little skeptical too, but I've come now to the realization that, first of all, it's really easy to, in the old days, meaning pre-coronavirus, 30, 40 some odd days ago, it was really, really hard to get, John Legend on a Skype or a Zoom, because John Legend's busy and he's doing other things. Well, now I'm pretty sure I know exactly where John Legend is. He's at home, right? And so
bring Jack for a coffee.
Exactly. It's very easy now to actually get interviews with people that you might not have been able to get an interview with in the past. And so this, again, represents a really tremendous opportunity for a young journalist who is a go-getter, who wants to try and book people on their own by contacting them or contacting their representatives. It actually has become a little easier to talk to people on the front lines. You know where doctors are going to be. You know where some of the nurses are going to be. And they are more than willing to share information about what they're seeing and what they're witnessing. And they actually value reporters who want to share their stories. The families who have lost loved ones to COVID-19 want to talk to reporters about what they went through. They want to share the stories of their loved ones. They want their loved ones to be memorialized. They don't want them to have died in vain. So for everybody who is lost to this pandemic, for everybody who's recovered from this pandemic, they have a story to tell. And it has become easier to get in contact with those people through the use of technology. And so I would say for a young reporter who is freelancing or who is, bemoaning the fact that they can't get out in the field, to take advantage of the fact that you have people who are willing and ready and able to share with you their stories. And I guarantee that if you book an interview with somebody who lost a loved one to this disease, to this infection, that you will be able to memorialize that person who's gone, and to shed light on their lives, and to honor them, which is ultimately what all of us want to do as journalists. That is my overarching goal all the time, no matter what story I'm doing, whether it's a serious story, whether it's a fun-hearted, lighthearted story. My goal is to memorialize and to share stories where people might not have had exposure to that story. And you can do that more than ever in the wake of this pandemic.
I think you've answered a bunch of the questions already, but there's
Right.
one that, I've also been thinking about, which is, tips on how to interview people, using technology and Zoom, especially because sometimes you get certain stories because you're in physical contact with the person, because you're face to face, and that could be a source who doesn't want to reveal himself. Some people are just not comfortable. Some people, may not even have technology or might not know how to use it. So how do you work around that?
Well, I mean, I think if you are a student at Columbia, you probably don't have that problem. But I don't know. That's interesting, because I would think that it's those of us who are a little older who probably struggle more with the technology. I mean, I believe it or not, I had never heard of Zoom until
No.
19. So, but when I text my sister or my brother, who's a teacher who's much younger than me, they're very familiar with it. And my sister texted me back that she's been using Zoom all day, every day, she said, for a while, like over a year. So I don't know that that's as much of an issue for younger reporters. It might be for older reporters, I guess, who may not be as familiar with the technology. But I mean, that's part of our industry, is adapting and overcoming. And so it just means that people have to get read in on how to use this stuff, and that's what they're going to do.
Okay. Is CBS increasingly leveraging local affiliate reporting or freelance reporting in areas that are further from reach?
I would say that CBSN has done that. When the broadcast center closed, CBSN was not able to broadcast. In other words, our regular anchors, myself and the others who anchor the national broadcast, were not able to anchor. And so CBSN was able to tap into CBSN Boston, CBSN San Francisco, CBSN Denver, and CBSN LA to essentially pick up the pieces and drive home the anchoring. And so we use those affiliates. We leaned on them very, very hard. I mean, can you imagine you are an anchor in Boston, where your primary focus for most of your career has been used in the Boston or New England area, and now you're being asked to anchor a national broadcast, in addition to still providing local information for people in the Boston area. They were amazing. They did an excellent job, and it was something. It was a sight to behold. And I and the entire news organization is internally grateful to our affiliates and our own what we call the own stations at CBS for stepping in and helping out with that. As you know, we all have recorded messages for the entire organization. I mean, Viacom CBS is an organization that we're all in this together, and I witnessed that with the affiliates, our correspondents, our anchors, and it's not just the people on air. I always have to shout out to the tech crews and the producers and the writers and the editors and the sound engineers and the people who are behind the scenes who ensure that those broadcasts make air. They stepped up, and it was a sight to behold.
There's a question from Greece, which is, when you're doing journalism from home, you need to discover new tools to make your reporting or interviews more lively.
I think that, there's a little bit of that. I mean, when we, so somebody asked them, I saw a couple of shout outs for Suvro Banerjee.
Right on top.
Here. Suvro is a graduate of the J School, 2012, I believe. He was the year right after me. When Suvro got here on day one, and this is what I mean about having sometimes other people that you can bounce ideas off of. Suvro came in on the first day that we were going to do that hit, And I said, I don't really know what we're going to do. I guess I'm just going to stand here like it's a normal live shot and say, and do my stories. And, and Suvra was like, no, let's figure out a way for you to like move from one side of the room to the other side of the room. And then I said, well, what about using these TVs? And all of a sudden we started brainstorming ideas. And now what you see is the result of that brainstorm where we said, let's have a little bit of movement because, the viewer at home, this is the visual medium as much as the journalism matters. People want to see movement. They want to see enthusiasm, especially for the stories that I do in that particular segment, which is basically it's a mix of hard news stories, but we always end with something that's a little fun, a little lighthearted. And so, yeah, we were able to figure out a way to make that move happen. To be able to do that, you need a couple of things. And I think part of it is that, I'm one of those I'm a correspondent who's game for anything. I'll do anything if it will work, if it will make if it will make what we do more appealing for our viewers. And so there are some who are just like, that's a little too much. I just want to stand here. This is what I do. My journalism is my writing and my reporting. And, that's okay too. But I think that, for what we do for that particular segment on CBS this morning, it does work that we do have a little bit of movement, that we have video that we can run out of the screens that you see in my apartment, which are my TV screens essentially that we put on the dining table. And Suvra will sit there, he'll connect his laptop to it, we'll get the elements, and then we'll roll the elements out on our screen the same way we would roll it out if we were in the studio.
Okay, so just like I said, we're going to try and wrap this up and make it fun and lighthearted. Now, I can see a guitar over there. So I know you have a band. Do you miss playing to an audience? And if you want, can we get a little performance here?
I would take that opportunity, Pavni, to play one of these guitars. Sadly, all of them are electric guitars, so there's no sound comes out of them. And my acoustic guitar is way in my bedroom in a
Fine.
case. But I would, God, if you told me before,
I did, by the way, in the email. But anyway,
did you really?
I have a plan B, which is I can see a lot of books. So is there a book recommendation or a show recommendation that we can take up on while we're sitting at home?
Ooh, yeah. I recently read. There was a great book that I read. It's called. I just want to make sure I get the name of the author right, but the title is called "Say Nothing."
Let me Google.
Patrick Radden Keefe. Patrick Radden Keefe is the author of a book called "Say Nothing: The True Story of Betrayal and Murder in Northern Ireland." I'm paraphrasing the subtitle, but it's a fascinating book on the Troubles in Northern Ireland and the true story of a mother who was executed by the Irish Republican Army and the aftermath of the investigation into her murder. And it's actually a book. Keefe is a journalist, I believe, and so the book is written as an investigation. It's really, really well done. The other book that I read that I really enjoyed was I read the biography of Muhammad Ali. It's called Ali: A Life by John Eeg. I read that recently. That was an amazing book. And I'm just looking to see what I've recently read. And of course, I've been reading a lot of current event books. A Very Stable Genius by Phil Rucker and Leonig from the Washington Post is also an excellent book.
Great, you have 2 recommendations, and next time we do this, we're getting a little band performance.
Yeah, exactly. And I will say that what was the name of that TV show set in Los Angeles about, with the family who has a taqueria? I'm looking at my fiance here, who's that
was gentrification or
yes, Hentified.
Okay.
Hentified. That's a great. If you want something to binge while you're at home, Hentified is a really remarkable piece of pop culture about a family in Los Angeles, affected by all the forces that we report on all the time. It's really a wonderful piece of television.
Thank you.
I want to make sure, though, I want to make sure that all these questions. I just want to take a quick look to see if there's anything in particular that.
Yes, please. Lots of good ones that popped in. I'm sorry I couldn't get through all of them. Very interactive audience.
I think we answered the question from the person who wanted to know how to conduct interviews in the digital medium. Yeah, okay. If I could improve any part of the technology I'm using, what would that be? That's a great question. I actually haven't given that a lot of thought. I think if anything, and this probably won't be able to be done because it's a question of fiber optics, but there's the delay that exists between remotes, and anchors and correspondents talking to each other through our IFBs is still an issue, which can lead to a little bit of awkward television. If there was any way to ever get that fixed, that would be a huge game changer. I agree with you about the room being there, but it's sort of presence. Yeah, somebody is asking a question about being there.
A lot of questions on.
Yeah, it's an important question. But the reality is that it's not. This is not new. Remotes are done all the time. When anchors are anchoring live broadcasts and they say so-and-so is joining us live from a location, whether it's via Skype or whether it's from a camera, this is not new. I think, it's just something that, it's being leaned on a lot more because of the risks that are inherent. I mean, look, I've spoken to doctors who have told me that we do not yet know. If you recall, in the early days, there were doctors, medical professionals were not sure about who would be affected. So the initial reporting out of China was that older people are more at risk, younger people not so much. Well, that has not proven to be the case, right? So the point I'm making is that we don't yet know enough about this virus to say and to be able to put people in an unnatural state of risk by being there. And so, yes, there will be moments where some will go into those locations, into those hospitals, but the ability to conduct these interviews remotely, I think, is one that we would just have to take advantage of. And I think that you'd have to, I guess, trust the news organization that you are receiving that information from to believe that they are doing all the things that are good and proper. My friend Avij has a question about the emotional impact. She mentions that when we were in Haiti together, we went to a cemetery where there were mass. This was a cemetery that I'm just going to plug in my computer before it dies. We visited a cemetery where there were so many bodies that were that had been crushed in the earthquake that they had them stacked at the entrance of the cemetery, and some of those stacks were taller than I was, of just bodies of humanity. And one of the things that people were doing in desperation was, if you had a little bit of money, you were paying somebody to take the body of your loved one that you had recovered from your home, and you would pay somebody to break into an existing crypt and replace the casket of somebody who had died, in some cases many years prior, in some cases 100 years prior, and to remove the casket from that existing crypt to then place the body of your person, your loved one, into the crypt. And it was as gruesome of a scene that I've ever seen in my life, where now you have, not in addition to these bodies, these fresh cadavers of humanity, you have bones of people that are now being dragged away by dogs, and it was terrible. And we realized that that I had a moment where I thought to myself that perhaps one of my grandparents, great grandparents, may have had their bodies removed from their crypt and tossed to the side. And so we did a story about that. We did a story about what was happening, but then I went to try to find the grave of my ancestors, and fortunately, it had not been disturbed. But that was, you asked about my colleague Maria. I think in many instances as reporters, we will have moments where we are connected to the story, where one of us, like my friend, Brooke Baldwin or Chris Cuomo, will be infected with the virus, and or my colleagues who were tested positive with COVID-19. That will drive the emotional impact of this story to a degree that sometimes we don't have with the stories that we're reporting on. And so that's why I was saying earlier that I don't know that the story has not really fully been told. Just like for 9/11, there's still an accounting to be done of the people who were affected by 9/11, the first responders who were sickened by their actions, their brave actions at the scene. Those stories are still being told. Those stories are still being reported. Reporters are still digging into those stories. People are still, ProPublica just had an amazing piece of journalism digging into the hijackers of the 9/11, of the planes on 9/11. That's in 2020, they're doing that reporting on something that happened, 15 years ago. And so, and many more Americans already have died through COVID-19 than died on 9/11. So this is going to affect all of us. All of us are going to have a story to share and to tell. The goal for us as reporters is to, maintain our to be fair to the story that we're telling, and where possible, be present. But when we're not able to be present, to still, share that story. I personally, and this is my opinion, I think that if you are doing an interview with a doctor or nurse or somebody on the front lines, or you're interviewing a family member who lost somebody to COVID-19, given the chance if you said to them, well, we can't be there physically with you, so we're not going to tell your story, we would never do that. If we can't physically be there, there are ways that we can share their stories. There are ways that we can memorialize the life of their loved one, and to tell the story of what they went through, how they lived, how they died, what their experiences were at the hospital, what their experiences were with the medical industry. And no one will ever be able to tell me that is not as powerful a piece of journalism as physically being in the room with that individual.
That's true. Thank you so much, and we look forward to more reporting from you. Thanks so much for your time, and everyone for joining us. We will try and post this online, and I'm just going to hand it off to Maria to close.
And I just want to say one thing. If you have any questions for me directly, please, you can always email me. You can email me my first name, last name @gmail.com. And you can, of course, reach out to me on social media, and I can answer any questions that you may have. I'm always open to that. Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. That's generous of you. Maria, do you want to close?
Yes. Thank you, Vlad, so much for the for your generosity with your time and your insights and everything. And Pavni, for your great questions and leading this discussion. We want to have more of these. So if you guys have any suggestions for other people that we can feature, Vlad was our first one because we think he's great. Please send an email to jalumni@columbia.edu. We're always there, open to suggestions and all. And I'll end with Vlad's video again, for those of you who may have joined us late. But thank you again for joining us from so far away, all of you. Good luck, stay safe, be well. Bye.
Bye, thank you.